My name is Clara Thorne, though for the last 4 years, most people have known me as Clara Monroe. The world, or at least the small, carefully curated slice of it I shared with my husband, Ethan, knew me as a freelance project manager for a boutique marketing firm. A quiet, unassuming woman who preferred the rustle of leaves in our garden to the clamor of city life, who found contentment in simple routines and the steady rhythm of our suburban existence in the green-hued town of Willow Creek. In another world, a world separated by the sleek, tinted windows of a downtown high-rise, I was just Clara Thorne. There, I was the founder and CEO of Beacon Creative, a creative agency I had built from a single flickering idea in my cramped apartment into a beacon of innovation in the industry. We didn't just create campaigns, we built narratives, breathed life into brands, and quietly shaped the cultural conversation. Beacon was my passion, my art, my legacy, a testament to a decade of sleepless nights and unwavering belief. I chose to live these two separate lives not out of deceit, but out of a deep-seated hope. I had seen what immense success could do to relationships. I had watched friends and colleagues become isolated by their wealth, their connections turning transactional, their partners becoming either resentful or sycophantic. I didn't want that. I wanted something real. I wanted to be loved for the woman who hummed off-key while baking bread, who got lost in old books, who believed in the quiet power of kindness, not for the name on a letterhead or the balance in a bank account. When I met Ethan, I thought I had found that. He was a senior financial analyst at a reputable local company, solid and dependable, with a warm smile that made me feel seen. He seemed to admire my simple life, my little job that gave me flexibility. He was the provider, the anchor, and I let him believe that because I loved the way he looked at me, as if I were his to protect. I loved him, and I thought love was about creating a space where the other person could feel their strongest. I hadn't yet realized that I was creating that space by diminishing my own. The fault lines in our foundation began, almost imperceptibly, with his sister, Sophie. She was a whirlwind of curated perfect Iona micro-influencer whose life, as documented on her shimmering social media feed, was an endless parade of brunch spots, designer outfits, and aspirational quotes about authenticity that felt anything but. In reality, Sophie was perpetually teetering on the edge of financial disaster, propped up by Ethan's unwavering sense of familial duty. "She's my little sister, Clara," he would say, his voice laced with a familiar mix of exasperation and affection, whenever I gently questioned another loan. Family looks out for each other. That's just how it is. At first, I admired his loyalty. But over the years, it became clear that looking out for Sophie often meant placating her whims, validating her dramas, and more frequently, siding with her against me. My quiet nature was interpreted as a lack of ambition. My simple tastes were seen as a judgment on her lavish lifestyle. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about my clothes or my job, and Ethan would remain silent, his silence a form of quiet agreement. I was the calm, placid lake, and Sophie was the stone he kept letting her throw into my waters, telling me the ripples were my own fault. The stone that would finally shatter the surface was Sophie's engagement to Marcus Hale. Marcus was a brilliant architect, a rising star who had recently launched his own firm. Sophie was ecstatic, and Ethan was immensely proud that his sister was marrying a man of such caliber. What neither of them knew was that Marcus and I had a history. 5 years ago, Marcus Hale was a gifted but unknown architect with a portfolio of breathtaking designs and no capital to bring them to life. He pitched his vision for a sustainable urban community to a dozen firms, and every single one had turned him down. It was too ambitious, too risky. My board at Beacon Creative felt the same. But I saw something in his eyes, a fire that reminded me of my own early days. I saw the soul in his blueprints. I overruled my board, and Beacon didn't just fund his first project. We crafted the story that launched his career into the stratosphere. He never forgot it. The first time Ethan introduced us, I saw the flicker of recognition in Marcus's eyes, quickly masked by confusion. Why was Clara Thorne, the visionary who had taken a chance on him, being introduced as a quiet housewife with a little marketing job? I caught him alone later and quietly asked him to keep my secret. I wasn't ready for my worlds to collide. I still believed I could manage the delicate balance. I still believed in the dream of the life I had built with Ethan. The day of the wedding arrived cloaked in the soft, misty light of a Willow Creek morning. The venue was the Crestwood Estate, an elegant estate nestled among ancient pines and manicured gardens, its stone walls exuding a timeless grace. Sophie had orchestrated every detail to be a fairy tale, a perfect backdrop for the perfect life she projected to the world. I knew, with a quiet certainty, that the joint account Ethan and I shared, an account I funded far more than he realized, was bearing the weight of this fantasy. I had chosen my dress with care, a simple, floor-length gown of dove-gray silk. It was elegant but understated, designed to blend in, to cede the spotlight entirely to the bride. I should have known that even my effort to be invisible would be seen as an affront. "Clara, you look so professional," Sophie had commented during the rehearsal dinner, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. It was her way of saying I looked plain, that I lacked the sparkle she valued so highly. Marcus, however, had caught my eye from across the room and given me a warm, genuine smile. "That color is stunning on you, Clara," he said when he had a moment alone with me. "You have a quiet grace that's rare." His words were a balm, a stark contrast to the subtle dismissals I'd grown accustomed to from my own husband. The ceremony was beautiful. Sun streamed through the chapel's stained-glass windows, painting the aisle in jewels of light as Sophie walked toward a visibly moved Marcus. For a moment, watching the genuine love in his eyes, my heart filled with a fragile hope. Perhaps this marriage would soften Sophie. Perhaps this day could be a new beginning for all of us. The reception began, and I slipped into my familiar role as a supportive wallflower. Ethan was in his element, playing the proud brother of the bride, and he barely spoke to me except to issue gentle commands disguised as requests. "Clara, could you make sure the gift table is tidy? Clara, the photographer needs the family, but maybe stand to the side for the main shots." Each directive was a small, sharp pinprick to my heart, but I complied without a word. It was Sophie's day. The first major fissure appeared during the toasts. Ethan stood, champagne flute in hand, a charming smile on his face. "To my sister, Sophie," he began. "She has always been a star. Bright, beautiful, and never afraid to chase what she wants. She's a woman who makes things happen. Marcus, you're a lucky man." He paused and let his gaze sweep the room until it landed on me. "I've always admired that about her. She was never content to just fade into the background. She knows her worth and isn't afraid to show it." The implication hung in the air, as clear and sharp as the clinking of glasses that followed. Unlike some people, I felt the sympathetic glances of a few guests who understood the subtext. I took a slow sip of water, the cold liquid doing nothing to cool the flush of shame on my cheeks. Later, as the band played a soft melody and couples drifted onto the dance floor, I found myself standing alone by the tall windows overlooking the gardens. I watched Ethan twirl Sophie around the floor, their laughter echoing in the grand hall. I had never felt more like an outsider in my own life. "You seem a world away." I turned to find Marcus standing beside me, his expression kind. "Just admiring the view," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "It's a beautiful evening." He studied my face for a moment, his gaze perceptive. "Clara, forgive me for being forward, but are you happy?" The question was so simple, so direct, that it stole my breath. When was the last time anyone had asked me that? When had I last asked myself? Of course, I answered automatically, but the words felt like a lie on my tongue. Before he could respond, Sophie swept in, her dress a cloud of white tulle. "There you are, darling. The photographer wants more pictures." She looped her arm through his possessively, then shot me a saccharine smile. "Clara, sweetie, could you go check on the cake? They're supposed to be wheeling it out any minute." "Of course," I murmured, turning to go. As I walked away, I heard her whisper to Marcus, not quite quietly enough, "I wish she'd learn to smile more. It's a wedding, for heaven's sake." The cake was cut, the flashbulbs popped, and Sophie reveled in the adoration of the crowd. Then, Her eyes found mine. A bright, brilliant smile spread across her face as she beckoned me forward. Clara. Sister. Come here. Surprised but pleased, I made my way toward her. Maybe this was it, the olive branch I had been waiting for. I just wanted to thank you for everything, she said, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. She opened her arms for a hug. You've been such a quiet help today. I stepped forward, my heart lifting with a cautious optimism. I leaned in to embrace her, to finally feel a sense of inclusion, of family. And that's when the delicate silk of my heel caught on the intricate lace hem of her train. The sound was minuscule, a soft rip that was barely audible over the music. But in the sudden stillness of Sophie's body, it felt like a thunderclap. My dress, she breathed, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. She pulled back, her eyes wide with horror. You ruined my dress. Sophie, I am so sorry, I said, my hands flying to my mouth. I didn't see it, You didn't see it? Her voice rose, sharp and shrill, cutting through the festive atmosphere. Guests began to turn. The band faltered. You stepped on my wedding gown. My couture gown. The damage was negligibly a few inches of lace had pulled away from the hem, invisible to anyone more than 2 feet away. But to Sophie, I had committed an unforgivable sin. And then, her hand flew up. The slap was shockingly loud in the suddenly silent ballroom. It was a sharp, stinging crack that left my cheek burning, my mind reeling. A collective gasp rippled through the 300 guests. How dare you, she seethed, her face a mask of fury. You couldn't even give me a hug without destroying something beautiful. She snatched a glass of red wine from a passing waiter's tray and, with a vicious flick of her wrist, flung its contents down the front of my dove-gray dress. The dark liquid bloomed across the silk, a violent stain against the pale fabric. There, she spat, her chest heaving. Now your dress is ruined, too. The world seemed to stop. I stood there, wine dripping onto the polished floor, the sting on my cheek a pale fire compared to the inferno of humiliation consuming me. I felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, a crushing weight of pity, judgment, and morbid curiosity. But the final, most devastating blow came not from Sophie, but from my husband. Ethan rushed forward, not to my side, but to his sister's. He wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders, his face a canvas of disappointment aimed squarely at me. Clara, what is wrong with you? His voice, though low, carried through the cavernous room with brutal clarity. This is Sophie's day. Her one perfect day. How could you be so clumsy? The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My husband. My partner. He was standing there, comforting my attacker, admonishing me in front of everyone we knew. Ethan, I whispered, my voice lost. Don't worry, sweetie, he murmured to Sophie, stroking her hair. Clara should have been more careful. She just wasn't thinking. He spoke of me as if I were a naughty child, an afterthought, my dignity a triviality in the face of Sophie's manufactured drama. I saw it all then, the past 4 years, in that one single, soul-crushing moment. I wasn't his partner, I was a supporting character in the story of his family, and my role was to be quiet, accommodating, and invisible. That was when the quiet click of Marcus's dress shoes on the marble floor cut through the silence. He moved with a calm, deliberate purpose toward the band's microphone stand. The room, which had begun to buzz with hushed gossip, fell silent once more. Every eye was on him. He reached the microphone and tapped it once. The soft thud echoed, a summons to attention. Excuse me, everyone, he said, his voice steady but radiating a cold, controlled fury that was more terrifying than any shout. He looked at his new wife, still clinging to her brother. Sophie, he said, his voice resonating through the sound system, each word a perfectly polished stone of ice. Did you just slap the founder and CEO of Beacon Creative? The name dropped into the silence like a depth charge, its ripples spreading instantly through the crowd. I saw dawning recognition on dozens of faces, business leaders, city officials, creatives, all of whom knew the name, if not the face. Whispers erupted. Beacon Creative? The Clara Thorne? Phones were discreetly pulled out. A few frantic taps and faces began to light up with astonishment. Sophie's face drained of all color. The triumphant rage of moments ago was replaced by a creeping, sickening dread. Ethan's expression shifted from protective indignation to utter, bewildered horror. But Marcus wasn't finished. His next words would not just change the course of the evening, they would dismantle the world I had so carefully and so foolishly hidden myself within. Marcus gripped the microphone, his knuckles white. The air in the Crestwood estate was thick with anticipation. He was no longer just a groom. He was a man holding court, about to pass a sentence that would alter all of our lives. For those of you who don't know, he continued, his voice resonating with an authority that commanded absolute attention, the woman my wife just assaulted is Clara Thorne. She is the mind behind Beacon Creative, a company she built from the ground up into one of the most respected creative agencies in the country. Her work has been lauded in every major business journal. Her name is synonymous with integrity and vision. I watched as the last vestiges of Ethan's composure crumbled. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place in his mind with agonizing slowness, me vague answers about work, my lack of financial stress, the ease with which we lived a life his salary alone could never have supported. He looked at me, truly looked at me, as if for the first time, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying understanding. Sophie's bouquet slipped from her trembling fingers and fell to the floor with a soft thud. But that's not the most important thing you should know, Marcus said, his voice softening as his gaze found mine across the room. It was filled with a profound respect that felt like a lifeline. 5 years ago, I was an architect with a dream nobody would back. I was told my ideas were impossible. I was on the verge of giving up. Beacon Creative was my last hope. Their entire board advised against my project. It was Clara, and Clara alone, who saw the potential. She fought for me. She championed my work when no one else would. Everything I have today, my firm, my reputation, I owe to her belief in me. The room was utterly still. Not a cough, not a shuffle, only the sound of 300 people holding their collective breath. And now Marcus's voice hardened again, a blade of tempered steel. I was set to announce next week that Hale Architecture and Beacon Creative are finalizing a $50 million partnership. The largest and most important project of my career. He paused, letting the weight of the number settle in the room. Sophie let out a small, strangled gasp. Was, Marcus repeated, the word hanging in the air like an executioner's axe. Because after witnessing the cruelty, the utter lack of character and grace shown here tonight, I cannot, in good conscience, move forward with a business partnership that is so deeply and personally compromised. He then turned his full attention to the two people who had been the center of my world. Sophie, he said, his voice laced with a deep, sorrowful disappointment. You just humiliated a woman who embodies the very qualities you pretend to admire: strength, success, and class. But she carries them with a humility you can't even comprehend. Then his gaze shifted to Ethan. And you are her husband. You stood by and watched your wife be physically and verbally attacked, and you defended the attacker. You belittled the woman you vowed to protect. What kind of man does that? The spell of silence finally broke. The chateau staff, who had been frozen against the walls, suddenly galvanized. They rushed toward me, their faces a mixture of awe and mortification. Ms. Thorne, please allow us, one waiter stammered, bowing slightly as he offered a stack of crisp linen napkins. Another appeared with a bottle of club soda, dabbing at the wine stain on my dress with a reverence usually reserved for priceless artifacts. The shift was dizzying. Moments ago, I was the clumsy, embarrassing wife. Now, I was a person of consequence, to be catered to and appeased. But their fussing barely registered. My focus was on Ethan, who finally found his voice. Clara, why? He choked out, his face pale. Why didn't you ever tell me? I looked at my husband, at the man I had loved enough to shrink myself for, and a profound, weary sadness settled over me. Would it have made a difference, Ethan? I asked, my voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. If you had known, would you have respected me? Or would you have simply found new ways to feel diminished by me? He had no answer. We both knew the truth. Marcus placed the microphone back on its stand and walked toward me. The crowd parted for him as if he were royalty. He stopped in front of me, his eyes full of a sincere, aching regret. "Clara," he said softly. "Are you all right?" I touched my cheek. The fiery sting had faded to a dull throb, a physical reminder of a wound that went far deeper. But as I looked at Marcus's compassionate face, at the shocked but newly respectful faces in the crowd, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. The pain was real, but so was the liberation. The two worlds I had fought so hard to keep separate had finally collided, and in the wreckage, I was finding myself again. I was more than all right. I was free. A profound calm settled over me, a stillness at the eye of the storm. The shock, the hurt, the humiliation, they were all still there, but they were no longer in control. I straightened my spine, a simple physical act that felt like reclaiming my own geography. "May I?" I asked Marcus, gesturing to the microphone. He nodded instantly, stepping aside to cede the floor. As I walked to the stand, the sound of my heels on the marble was the only sound in the vast ballroom. Each step was deliberate, a quiet declaration. I looked out at the sea of faces, a mosaic of confusion, pity, and dawning respect. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and steady. It did not tremble. "For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Clara Thorne." A few more guests gasped, connecting the final dots. I suppose it's a name I haven't used much in my personal life for the past few years. My eyes found Sophie, who stood frozen, her face a tear-streaked ruin. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate what should have been a joyous day. A day of new beginnings." I paused, letting my words settle. I chose to keep my professional life private for a simple reason. I believe that love should be blind not to faults, but to fortune. I wanted to build a life with someone who valued me for my heart and my mind, not for my company's valuation. I turned my gaze to Ethan. He flinched, his face a portrait of agony and regret. I fell in love with a man I believed was my partner, my protector. I spent 4 years making myself smaller, quieter, less visible. I thought that was the price of peace. I thought that was what love required of me. I smiled through comments about my lack of drive from people who had no concept of the world I had built. I accepted being treated like a peripheral character in my own marriage. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with the weight of my confession. "Tonight," I continued, my voice unwavering, "I was publicly shamed and physically assaulted by a member of my own family. But the deepest cut didn't come from a hand or from a spilled glass of wine. It came from the silence of my husband. It came from watching the man who vowed to stand by me choose to stand with my abuser instead." Ethan took a staggering step forward. "Clara, please." "I didn't know." "You didn't know what, Ethan?" I asked, my voice gentle but firm. "That it's wrong to humiliate your wife? That a partner deserves loyalty and respect, regardless of their job title? You didn't need to know about Beacon Creative to know that. You only needed to know me. The kind, patient, loving woman I have tried to be for you every single day. And in the moment that mattered most, you showed me you never really saw her at all." I turned back to the room. Success doesn't grant you a license to be cruel. But neither does love require you to accept cruelty. For 4 years, I accepted disrespect as a substitute for affection. Tonight, I learned that my own self-respect is not a currency I am willing to trade any longer. I looked directly at Sophie, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. "Sophie, your mistake wasn't slapping a CEO. Your mistake was slapping a human being you believed had no power to fight back. That is a failure of character, not of information." Then I looked at Marcus, whose expression was one of solemn pride. "Marcus, thank you. Thank you for being a man of integrity. And for the record, our partnership will proceed as planned. Beacon Creative makes decisions based on merit, not on the personal failings of a person's spouse. Your vision deserves to be realized." A wave of murmurs went through the business contingent in the crowd. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise and gratitude. "And now," I said, my voice softening, "I believe I will take my leave. I wish you all a good evening." I turned to walk away, but Ethan's desperate voice stopped me. Clara, don't. Please. We can fix this. I love you. I turned back to him, and for the first time, I let the raw hurt show in my eyes. This isn't about one night, Ethan. This is about 4 years of 1,000 tiny betrayals of silence and dismissal. You don't love me. You love the idea of a wife who didn't challenge you, who made you feel like the center of the universe. You never loved the real me because you never bothered to look for her. If you had, you would have known that the woman who made your coffee every morning and the woman who built a national brand were one and the same. And you would have been proud of both. With that, I turned and walked toward the grand doors of the ballroom. The crowd parted for me like the sea. There were no whispers now, only a profound, respectful silence. I could hear Sophie's desperate sobs behind me and Ethan's broken pleas, but they sounded distant, like echoes from a life I had already left behind. As I stepped out of the chateau and into the cool, clean night air, I felt the heavy cloak of Clara Monroe fall from my shoulders. The valet, his eyes wide with newfound deference, rushed to bring my car. Not the practical sedan Ethan knew, but the sleek, obsidian black car I kept for myself, the one that matched the woman I had forgotten I was. Driving away from the lights of the Crestwood estate, leaving the wreckage of one life in my rearview mirror, I didn't feel anger or even a desire for revenge. I felt a quiet, soaring sense of release. I wasn't just driving home. I was driving back to myself. The following weeks were a blur of quiet efficiency. My lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman who had been a friend for years, handled the divorce with swift precision. The news of the wedding slap, as the gossip columns called it, became a brief, sensational story, but I refused all interviews, allowing my work to speak for me instead. The announcement of the $50 million partnership between Beacon Creative and Hale Architecture overshadowed the scandal, turning the narrative from one of personal drama to one of professional resilience. Ethan tried to contact me several times. He left long, rambling voicemails filled with regret and confusion. He sent texts promising to change, to go to therapy, to learn how to be the man I deserved. But I knew, with a certainty that was both sad and freeing, that the foundation of our marriage was built on a lie, not my lie of omission, but his lie of perception. He had fallen in love with a reflection, and the real person was simply too much for him to see. I never responded. I learned through mutual acquaintances that he and Sophie had a bitter falling out. The revelation of my identity had shattered the family dynamic, exposing the transactional nature of their bond. Ethan was forced to confront the reality of his own finances, and Sophie had to face a world where her brother could no longer bankroll her curated existence. Marcus and Sophie's marriage, surprisingly, survived. He told me months later, over a coffee that was now a meeting of equals, that the incident had been a brutal but necessary catalyst. Sophie had hit rock bottom that night. Stripped of her social standing and forced to look at the ugliness of her actions, she began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding herself from the inside out. Their journey was difficult, but Marcus had chosen to see the flicker of potential for change in her, just as I had once seen the potential for greatness in him. I found that I genuinely wished them well. As for me, I didn't throw myself into work as an escape. Instead, I integrated my worlds. I was no longer Clara Monroe or Clara Thorne. I was simply Clara. I hosted small dinner parties at my downtown penthouse, the one Ethan never knew existed, for my friends and my executive team alike. I took solo trips to the coast, feeling the salt spray on my face, reveling in the simple joy of my own company. I found a new kind of peace, not in being small, but in being whole. Sometimes, late at night, I stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, looking out at the glittering tapestry of Willow Creek. The city lights stretch out before me, a constellation of stories, dreams, and connections. I think about that night at the Crestwood estate, about the sting of a hand on my cheek and the cold shock of spilled wine. It wasn't an ending. It was an awakening. I don't regret the years I spent in the quiet suburbs, hiding my light. That experience taught me a vital lesson. Real love doesn't ask you to dim your shine so that it can feel brighter. Real love stands beside you and marvels at how you illuminate the world. The greatest act of self-respect is not to demand that others see your worth, but to refuse to stay where it is ignored. That night, I walked out of a ballroom and into the brilliant, expansive light of my own life. And I have never looked back.